Hello everyone. So what I'd like to do in this lecture video today is review the idea of dimensional analysis and what that means. Okay, so let's just redefine what that is. So dimensional analysis as a tool is the process of just converting units. So essentially we're changing one unit or one way of measure into another measure. Okay, and so you guys do this a lot, right? You do this all the time, okay? And you may not think about it because it's so ingrained in what you're doing, but there are some really good examples of things that you already do that are related to dimensional analysis, okay? So the idea that I like to use is money, okay? So we all know what money is, right? And if we talk about our basic unit of money, right, that's the dollar bill, okay? So if we say that this thing right here, this box represents $1, I can take that dollar and I can break it up in a few different ways. Okay, so for example, if I want to take that dollar and split it amongst 4 different people, right? So this whole box still represents $1, but if I want to break it up into 4 people, right? I can do that, right? Where each individual is going to get 25 cents, right? They're all going to get a quarter. So if we think about the relative amount of money, right? Does it change? No, it's all still a dollar, right? It all still fits inside that same box. Right? I just know that $1 is the equivalent to, wow, you're right, is equivalent to 4 quarters. Okay, so I know that information, right, because I've done it before, right, you've experienced that with money plenty of times, right, that $1 is the equivalent to 4 quarters. Okay, if I want to take that same dollar and split it up amongst more people, right, I can do that, right? I can take this and split it up into nickels. Very poorly. Right, so if I count this up though, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I've got in this box now 20 boxes, right? So I've split it up to where each box is equivalent to 5 cents. Right, and if I add up each of those 5-cent chunks, right, they're all going to equal $1. So I also know that $1 is equal to 20 nickels. Right, so again, still having that same amount, right, but I'm just measuring and doling it out in a different way. Okay, another way that you all have experienced or practiced this is with measurements, right? With the idea that what you are measuring or looking for is with a foot, right? If I asked you to take 1 foot, right, you can split that up into 12 inches, right? You guys know how to do that. Another thing you guys know how to do is you know that a yard is about 3 feet. Okay, so all of these things that we've related here, right, they're all equivalencies. Okay, so with these, what we've made are equivalent relationships, right? These are the same value. $1 equals 4 quarters. There's a reason why we use an equal sign. It's because they're the same. Okay, so in these things, what we have created in our different examples is we've created conversion factors. Okay, this is essentially a 1-to-1 ratio that we multiply our values by. Okay, so let's do some examples where we're actually playing around with some dimensional analysis. Okay, so I'm doing some examples. Okay, so let's say with our measurement example, let's say that I'm measuring a chunk of land that I count out as being 50 yards. Okay, but the program that I want to use to say figure out the best planting method is giving me everything to where I need to convert it into inches. Okay, so I have to somehow take this measure of 50 yards and change it into a certain number of inches so that I can convey that information to someone else, right? That they know what I'm talking about in that particular unit, okay? So in this whole process, some things to remember. I am not changing the measure, okay? So the amount of inches will be equivalent to that same thing but measured in yards. So I'm not changing any of that. All I'm doing is multiplying this number so that I can convert it from where I tell someone that it's in feet into inches. Okay, that's all I'm doing. Still going to be the same exact number. Okay. All right, so let's do our example and set it up. Okay, so there's a few different ways of going about this, but the easiest way that I found is to set it up as like fractions. Okay, so that I know what I'm converting everything to. So like here where we're writing 3 feet is equivalent to 1 yard, it's the same as saying that 3 feet over 1 yard is equal to 1, right? Since these two things are equivalent to each other, the value when you divide them should be equal to 1, right? So just like all of your fractions, this and this are the same. So no matter what I do, I'm still multiplying my number by 1, okay? So let's start with our value. So here I've got 50 yards, okay? So I can set that over 1, right? Since anything over 1 will always be itself. Okay, and then now I need to think about, okay, what are the steps I need to do to get from yards to inches? So in my conversion factors here, I don't have one that goes directly from yards to inches, right? I don't know what that value is, but I do know some intermittent things. I know that 1 yard is equivalent to 3 feet, and I know that a foot is equal to 12 inches. So I can change my yards to feet, and then change my feet to inches, and solve that way. Okay, so let's do that. So if I multiply my fractions together, again, I'm multiplying by 1 here, right? The conversion factor's there. Okay, so whenever I'm setting up fractions, I want to put what I want goes in the numerator. So what I want to know is I want to know this value in, are you recording? All right, so what I want to know is my value in feet. Okay, and then what I want to cancel out should go in the denominator. Okay, so if I want to get rid of yards, right, because I want these units to cancel out. Okay, so by doing this, what this allows me to do is, since I'm dividing by essentially the same unit, those units cancel out. It's sort of like when you're doing a division where you're taking like 1,000 by 100, right? You can cancel out these zeros since they're both in the numerator and the denominator. You're left with your final value of 10. Okay, so in this case, what you're doing is something similar, right? You've got yards over in the numerator, yards in the denominator, right? They can cancel each other out, and I'm left with whatever's there. Okay, so let's do our multiplication. Okay, or fill in our rest of our value. So here I've got 3 feet, because I know there's 3 feet for every 1 yard. My yards will cancel out each other, and so now I'm left with this value. So if I take 50 yards over 1, multiplied by 3 feet over 1 yard, just clean it up, yard cancel out. So 50 times 3 gives me 150 feet, okay, because my yards have canceled out. Okay, so now I've converted my value from yards to feet. Okay, so now I need to take the next step and convert feet into inches. So like before, I'll set this over 1, and then I can multiply it by my conversion factor. So in this case, I know that for every 1 foot, I have 12 inches. So what do I want? I want the unit inches in my numerator, so I'll add 12 here. What I want to get rid of is feet. So I know that 1 foot is 12 inches, so I'll put that in the denominator. My feet cancel out. I multiply my value, 150 by 12. And I can get my final value in inches, which is 1,800 inches. Okay, so I've converted this to now say that that 100 or that 50 yards I started with is now 180 inches. Okay, so in this example we have again our conversion factor. Okay, set up so that we're multiplying everything by 1 essentially. That 50 yards is still going to be 1,800 inches, right? It's still the same value or amount that we've measured. Okay, let's do one more example where we're doing something a little bit different. Let's say that we're dealing with something like, what would be a good example? Let's say we're dealing with a measure that's a little odd. Let's say fathoms. So a fathom is a measure that we use in the water to denote a certain distance. So what actually it is, 1 fathom is equivalent to about 6 feet. Okay? And that so we've got that conversion factor, right? We know that 1 fathom is about 6 feet. Okay? So let's do an example where I want to figure out or say communicate from someone that I'm sailing with that there's a really cool fish that is, I don't know, a certain distance below below the water, all right? But let's say this person is from Europe, right? And they don't understand what a fathom is because it's an imperial measurement that's being propagated by, centuries of sailing. But let's say that you want to tell that person that you've got a really cool fish that is at 80 fathoms, or let's say 82.4 fathoms. And you want to tell them what that is in let's say centimeters, okay? All right, so let's set this up. Let's try to figure out what we know about some of these different conversion factors, okay? So if you look at your table or something like that, you can usually find some conversion factors, and I've given you quite a few of them. So one of them you might have is that you know that an inch is about the same as 2.54 centimeters, okay? So if we look at this, right, we know what fathom are in feet. We know that inches are that in centimeters, right? And we know that for every 1 foot, right, we've got 12 inches. Okay, so part of your goal is to try to figure out what are the steps I might need to take to get there. You're not always going to be given like a step that's going to take you directly from what you know to what you need to know. Right? You may have like 3 or 4 or 30 steps in between, right? Depending upon the type of question that you're given. Okay, sometimes it's 1, sometimes it's more than 1. In this one, if we want to set it up and think about what we know, right? We know we've got fathoms. And I want to get rid of fathoms, but I know that for the fathoms, if I multiply it here, I want to get rid of it. So what do I know that has a conversion factor that I know that has fathoms in it? So I know feet. Okay, so I know that for every fathom, there's some measure of feet. Okay, so now I know feet. I want to get rid of it. Is there a conversion factor I know that's got something in it that I know? So I know inches. Okay. All right, so then I want to get rid of inches, and then I've got this conversion factor for 1 inch is about 2.54 centimeters. So that's what I would set up. So if I look here, all of my units cancel out that I don't want, and I'm left with the unit that I do want, okay? So let's plug that in and do the math, okay? So what I like to do is just kind of set up the whole thing in one go, and then simplify my fraction, okay? So I'm starting out with, what was it, 82.4 fathoms. Set that over 1 just to keep my fractions in order. Okay, so then let's do my conversion. So I know that there are 6 feet in every 1 fathom. I know that there is for every 1 foot, 12 inches. And I know for every 1 inch, there are 2.54 centimeters. Okay, so let's simplify this. So I can cancel out all of my units that are opposite each other. So those all go away. So then what I'm doing is I'm multiplying my numerator together. So I've got 82.4 times 6 times 12 times 2.54 centimeters all over 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. So 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. So I know my numerator is where my math is, or where my calculation needs to be. My denominator is 1, so I don't really need to worry about that. So if I multiply everything together, calculator break, I get a pretty big number, which is 15069.312. So with sig fig, since my first number only had 3, my final value would need to be 1507 fathoms. 70 fathoms. Okay. Or sorry, centimeters. 15070 centimeters. Okay. That would be my value. Okay. So in this particular case, right, I've got multiple steps that I have to kind of figure out and think about what units do I have in order to get to that. So it's like solving a puzzle sometimes to try to solve those different things. Okay, so we're going to practice this a little bit more, but hopefully these examples will help you as you're trying to solve them. So if you have if you continue to have questions, please let me know. I'm happy to try to answer them.